Welcome everyone to the Data-Driven Policymaking Week. We've just opened the webinar, so we'll give everyone a few minutes to start joining us. My name is Marieke Willems from Trust IT, and this is the first edition of the week, and we're going to address policies against radicalization. So giving people a few minutes to join. So welcome, you're joining the Data-Driven Policymaking Week, its first edition, Policies Against Radicalization. We are still giving everyone one more minute to join so that everyone can start listening to us from the start. Let's see how we're doing there. Okay, Zach, I think we can start. So welcome everyone, welcome for joining us. Welcome to the Data-Driven Policymaking Week. Today is the first edition where we're going to address policies against radicalization. My name is Marieke Willems from Trust IT, and I'll be moderating this webinar. So you have entered this webinar in a listen-only mode. You of course have the possibility to add your comments or your questions in the Q&A that you find at the bottom of the Zoom platform, and we'll be sure to address them in the panel discussion or at a later stage. Okay, so then rest me to say that this webinar is being recorded, and that the recordings as well as the slides will be made available after the webinar. So let's get started. These are my fellow speakers today. So Armend, Duzha, Daniele, Crespi, and Tjerk, Timan. I'll give a brief overview of their bios when they're starting to speak. So for now, I think it would be wise to make you a little bit acquainted with what Policy Cloud is. Policy Cloud is a European H2020 project. It started in January 2020 and will last for 3 years until December 2022. We will be working on the European Cloud for Data-Driven Policy Management, and will provide an integrated reusable models, analytical tools. So we will turn the raw data that we're dealing with into valuable and actionable knowledge towards efficient policy making. So the budget, you can see it here, is 5 million, and we are working with 15 partners from all over Europe. What will Policy Cloud deliver? It will be delivering an integrated cloud-based environment. It will provide technologies for policy optimization across sectors through analyzed interlinked data sets. We'll be providing a policy development toolkit, and we'll work on interoperable and reusable models. So that's very short in what we'll be delivering, but we'll be implementing our solution in 4 different pilot cases. These are the topics of this week's Data-Driven Policymaking Week. And today we are going to highlight policies against radicalization, which is our pilot in Italy. So obviously we have 4 pilots, so 4 days where we're going to highlight them. Today, policies against radicalization. Tomorrow, urban policy making through analysis of crowdsourced data. The day after tomorrow, on the 28th, we'll be talking about intelligent policies for the food value chain. And on Thursday, we'll be talking about open data policies for citizens. So every day at 2. The agenda of today's session is going to be an introduction, which I just gave. We'll also want to know a little bit more about you, who you are. We'll then go into the policy challenge, where Daniele Crespi will guide us through the policies against radicalization, so the policy challenge of this pilot. Then Armend, Duzha from Majoli will take us through the solution that Policy Cloud will provide to address the challenge that is then explained already by Daniele. And then Tjerk, Timan from TNO will take us through the bigger picture of the policy challenge and the solution that Policy Cloud is providing. And then we have time for questions and answers, where we would like to invite you to answer our expert panel questions. But also we would like to engage you in in a discussion through where you can pose your questions in the chat already that indicated below. So for now, without further ado, I would like to go to Daniele Crespi. Sorry, DePaul. Yes, thanks, Zach. So would you please indicate which stakeholder group do you belong to? So do you represent a police, law enforcement? Are you a policymaker? Are you an IT specialist? Or do you not fit to any of these three above? And do you belong to other in this case? So could you please indicate who you belong to, which stakeholder group that suits you best, so that we can have an understanding of who we have on the call, who we have the pleasure of engaging with today. Okay, so 81% indicates other, and 90% indicates IT specialist. Okay, thanks. So Daniele, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to give the floor to you. Before, I would like to give a short introduction of you. So Daniele Crespi is head of the e-government and innovation services at Maggioli. He was a digital innovation manager at Lombardy Informatica, where among others, he was responsible for providing support to the Lombardy region for the implementation of the digital agenda for Lombardy. So the open government and open data. He has a long-standing experience in the public sector with particular reference to innovative services and relations between public administrations, citizens, and businesses. So Daniele, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Marieke, for the introduction. I share my screen so I can start with my presentation. Just a second. Okay. Okay, so thank you for being connected for our webinars. In my presentation, I will introduce our use case that it's about policies to prevent and counter radicalization. First of all, there are many various definitions of radicalization. The one you can see in my slide is from the United Nations Office of Counterterrorism, and is focusing on the action that contain in some way support or facilitation of violence for many different reasons, political, ideological, or religious. Recently, the European Policy Office, Europol, has recommended to reference to violent extremist social trend rather than using the radicalization terms. In any case, I assume that it's quite clear that we are talking about not simple belief or right to speech, but any kind of violent attributes. And to take care about radicalization, we have to take all different and specific domains like the prison and judiciary system, migration hotspot, and asylum center, and so on, as you can see. So we have to consider many parts of our cities, of our communities, in some way that can be involved on this kind of process. Also, internet and media, that is part of the domain that we have to manage in our use case. There are many actors involved. Obviously, the law enforcement agency, the local municipality at every level, starting from municipality to regions, to national, to Europe, and international. And so many many different actors in some way taking care about this kind of process. Local enforcement agency is one important stakeholder, but also school or social workers, anyone will have contact with people that can be in some way involved on some radicalization process, like religious community, and also some European Union association or initiatives like the European Forum for Urban Security or European Crime Prevention Network and so on. So in our use case, we have a lot of stakeholders to involve in co-creation and process and activities. So this is mainly the purpose of the project, and Armend will give you a more in-depth coverage of technology and solution. Okay.
Thanks, Daniele. Thank you very much. Armend, before I give you the floor, I will briefly introduce you. So Armend Duzha is Senior Project Manager and Research Associate at Majoli, as well as Daniele. So he's a Senior Project Manager there, where he's been involved in more than 20 projects in different domains, including cloud computing, big data analytics, and cybersecurity. And he's particularly specialized in transferring research results into the industry. Armend, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Marieke, for the introduction. So good afternoon, everyone, also from my side. I hope you can see the presentation. Okay, so as Marieke and Daniele also anticipated, for this part of the presentation, I am going to go more into the details of this specific use case and how Policy Cloud is supporting the policymakers in the radicalization domain in their daily operation. So first of all, I just want to summarize what are the main goals for this use case within the scope of Policy Cloud project. And the first, of course, is to reduce the occurrence of radicalization by early identifying warning signals, but also potential risk that, let's say, by analyzing the data from social media and other data sources, but also to promote secure access to public spaces for more people by enriching their perception of security and safety, and also to encourage the citizen engagement and trust in the perceived legitimacy of public authorities. So as we also discussed before, at any level, from local level, so we have municipalities, central level, the regions and governments, but also law enforcement agencies and other national and European organizations. In terms of more technical objectives, I have called them strategic objectives because they are linked to specific, let's say, features or functionalities provided by Policy Cloud system. And I have enlisted some of them, but of course we are now closing, let's say, close to the second half of the to the first half of the project, and during the project duration, the use case may also evolve, and other objectives may be included. But for now, these are the objectives that we have included so far. So to use the different data sources to understand hidden patterns and new trends, to extract, analyze, and classify information based on defined ontologies in order to generate useful insight about radicalization efforts and incidents, to design new policies or update existing ones in order to elaborate suitable means and countermeasures to prevent radicalization, as well as to contrast the spreading of online propaganda, and to create measurable key performance indicators and evaluate the impact of the existing policies or new policies to be implemented. So how is Policy Cloud supporting policymakers in the security domain? First of all, just a short summary about Policy Cloud system itself. So it is a cloud-based system, the decision support system that allows public authorities to model, implement, evaluate, and adapt cross-border evidence-based and data-driven policies by using interoperable and reusable models and analytical tools while preserving privacy and security according to the EU and national laws and regulation. So as you see, I have put in evidence some key elements that characterize Policy Cloud system compared to existing solutions out in the market. So first of all, we provide interoperable and reusable models that are possible, let's say, to be integrated also with existing solutions or other solutions provided by external stakeholders. And of course, there should be an interest for evidence-based and data-driven policies, because if there is a policy maker who is not aware of this kind of policies, or they are not interested in working in data-driven policies, probably Policy Cloud is not the best solution for them. Okay, so what services we are providing to the policymakers? As already mentioned, so this is a project that is using the cloud, the European Cloud Initiative. And so we have, of course, providing the solution as a cloud-based, in a cloud-based environment, but there are also other functionalities provided by the European Cloud Initiative. Another thing are the big data analytical tools that I already mentioned before. So these tools are also reusable and so not specific to the radicalization domain, but also to any other domains that policymakers are working in their operation. We provide adaptive visualization technologies in order to visualize the results, also reports of these policies that will be designed and implemented. And as already mentioned, legal ethics and privacy compliance, and impact assessment and monitoring. In terms of requirements, so just to mention here that the first iteration of the requirements, elicitation, analysis, and prioritization has been done with internal stakeholders, so policymakers from the different end user organizations that are involved in the project, but also with external stakeholders that are not directly involved in the project, but that might be involved or that are part of the entire process of the policy modeling, implementation, and adaptation. So we have already organized a first set of co-creation workshops with external stakeholders in order to validate these requirements, and also to collect additional requirements or insights by different actors that are involved in the policy definition. So in terms of requirements for this specific use case, we have different visualization tools, opinion mining for the analysis of information from social media, and also sentiment analysis, social dynamics, and behavioral data analytics. So in the picture on the right-hand side, you can also see the specific, let's say, tools that are being implemented and are used to be, let's say, are available to be used by the policymakers. In terms of data requirements, so we have so far integrated with the Global Terrorism Database and the RAN database of worldwide terrorism incidents, but of course we support also, let's say, data coming from social media like Twitter, Facebook, and Reddit, but also other web pages messages or blog posts in the, let's say, in the context of RSS feeds. So there is the policymaker who decides, let's say, which data set he is interested to investigate for a specific policy, and also the time horizon, for example, that might be useful for the analysis. In terms of scenarios, I have already provided some, let's say, initial set of scenarios that are also already being tested by the policymakers in the context of the project. The first one is the possibility to map the different radicalization incidents in a given area. So there is this function that allows, let's say, to produce a heat map showing the different radicalization incident that has happened in a specific area or in a more broader area. So the policymaker can investigate, for example, since our use case is being, let's say, implemented in the Lombardy region, so we can, the policymaker can first check what is happening around Lombardy region. So not only in the region itself, but also in the regions close by, but also in other countries, because as we know, radicalization is a cross-border effect and phenomena, and so it is not, let's say, it is not sufficient to investigate and analyze these incidents and insights from, let's say, for taking one dedicated location in order to validate how the policy that have been implemented is somehow, let's say, fighting the radicalization or not. Other scenarios that are being implemented. There is this scenario that we have called radicalized groups and individuals, because this allows policymakers to identify which are the radicalized groups or individuals that are active, for example, in social media, like in Twitter, in Facebook. And another thing that I want to mention, that probably also it was mentioned before by my colleague Daniele, that in this specific use case, we are not only interested for religious, let's say, radicalization, but also political radicalization, because, for example, in Italy, we have a high number of cases of political incidents that have happened during the last year, and probably more than religious radicalization. And so, let's say, this tool allows to investigate both cases, so not simply political, but also religious radicalization. And here, of course, there will be the possibility to see the different groups or individuals that have been active on a time horizon defined by the policymaker, and and also investigate where these groups are active. So if they are active to a location nearby Italy, if there have been actions in Italy that are linked to these groups. Another scenario that can be, let's say, supported by this use case is the possibility to analyze trends and possible threats. So the policymaker defines a set of keywords, as it was also presented before. So based on these keywords, the system analyzes the different data sets that are specified by the policymaker and present the results to the policymaker by providing, let's say, different visualization in terms of outcomes that can be supported for the policy modeling and validation. And the last scenario that we have, let's say, so far taken into consideration is the possibility to assess online activities from these different groups and individuals that are being active, let's say, in the social media. And so to investigate also, for example, if these activities are, let's say, increasing or decreasing when there is also a major event that has happened. So, for example, if there are any political election close by, or there has been, let's say, a new political reform that is going to come into force, and there are political forces that are against these policies, for example, policies for the migrations or policies related to let's say, inclusion and people in a disadvantaged situation. So these are some cases that can influence somehow the online activities or these individuals or organized groups. I think, yeah, this was my last presentation. And if you have any questions, we will take them in the Q&A session.
Thanks, Armend. Thank you very much. There is actually already one question which we'll take to the discussion after the presentation of Tjerk. Tjerk, while you start setting up your slides, I'll briefly present you. So Tjerk Timan is policy researcher at TNO, and he's also a member of the Policy Cloud Impact Creation Board. He currently works as a policy researcher at TNO, the Netherlands, and is addressing questions of data policy, governance, and societal impact of big data and artificial intelligence in projects such as the BDVA, the Once Only Principle, and the JRC AI Watch program. He's currently leading a program on trustworthy artificial intelligence, dealing with technical and organizational fairness and transparency in artificial intelligence, and understanding long-term social impacts. Tjerk, thanks for joining us. The floor is yours.
Marieke, for this very lengthy intro. In the many activities that I do in this in this webinar, I represent the Impact Creation Board of Policy Cloud, together with many other way more brighter minds than mine who are active in this field. Who, as a group, we try to spread the message of the Policy Cloud project, but we also try to think about the level of impact and how to achieve that and how to look at that. And from that perspective, I have some reflections on the project so far, and some questions also that can lead up to the discussion. And I won't take too long, but I try to group them in 4 kind of subsections, which are, I think, important elements of understanding policy. Data-driven policymaking and evidence-based policymaking in practice. It sounds nice, but in practice you have to have quite the things to think about. First of all, is understanding the data lifecycle, data mining lifecycle very well from a technical point of view, and more importantly, also the interaction of those kind of technical tools with a policy lifecycle. Policies come and go, and constellations of particular parties who develop policies come and go. And it's very interesting to think about how these tools of Policy Cloud connect to that policy lifecycle. Of course, the big event last week was the publication of the regulation on AI in Europe, which has lesser influence on this use case, but in general on using data and AI models to predict things, to do things, and to base policies on that. It will grab into that as well. And finally, I want to talk about some kind of political implications and resources that are connected to this kind of tools, because as we see in the picture on the left, we know how these systems in governments can turn sour and lead to scandals, but we also see that there is a potential need and even a kind of moral obligation for a government to use the information and the data sources and the AI that is out there to create better policies and to make better use of the resources that they have. So this is always an interesting tension. First of all, I think what is interesting is the understanding of the data lifecycle. If we say, okay, there's the project makes use of existing databases that are verified and therefore trustworthy, but the more you move to open source intelligence and to social media type of content, the more trickier it becomes to actually have a level or assess a level of trust and quality in that data. And what's more, there's often a lot of data under that data. So how far can you go in using that? And what is very interesting as well, I think, in a policy cloud context, in all kinds of policy that is based on data-driven modeling, it's also to think about who is making these tools and how open and disputable are the models that are behind your predictive tool. So can we actually discuss data labels? Can we see how things are classified? To what extent should you be open about that in this particular use case? Of course, there are reasons not to be, but there are reasons to be. So that this is an interesting kind of tension that will come up. And another thing that I find very interesting is to look at is to see, especially when you look at social media audiences and radicalization, that is often fueled by echo chambers online and by specific social media groups, as we saw recently in the US as well. That even if you know about these kind of fringe media that is popping up, and they're moving away more from the mainstream. It's not all on Facebook anymore, but more in smaller audiences. The effect might be less on an oil spill kind of level, but then again, the content might be more important because you might have the more radical people grouping there. How do you keep track of that? So you also need to combine in your data collection also kind of a prediction or an idea on how, especially online, these kind of audiences are moving and what kind of tools they use digitally and physically to get there. And of course, there's also new possibilities. So in the technical side, there is, for instance, multi-party computation, which leads a way to actually share sources securely. So it's also interesting to see how policy cloud solutions can actually be implemented in existing systems that already exist in different governments that are currently in use, and how you can, for instance, in a safe way, share data between different governmental departments. And I think what is very important in this upcoming world of data-driven policymaking, and of which Policy Cloud is a perfect example of developing this and pushing this further, is how can we make sure that we have a long-term sustainable solution. So what you can see in the picture on the beautiful circle, which is one of many models in data lifecycle, is that you need to understand the data, you need to prepare the data and clean it up and really make it ready for your purpose of analyzing. Then you have to understand what kind of model works on that data. You have to evaluate that. Sometimes that's an iterative loop that needs to go back to the drawing board before you can actually deploy it. And this whole process is, of course, what we try to do, these use cases, to really learn from what works there in particular areas. And this is often nitty-gritty work. It's not so easy and light and sleek as some people might think. So I'm also very curious to see what happens there in terms of also generic lessons from the Policy Cloud project in terms of what you need to have in store as a local government or as a member state to actually start really picking up those tools and start using them. And the connection to the policy life cycle, the second point I think is very interesting. Ourselves at TNO, we have done this kind of work of data-driven policymaking, what we call the Policy Lab, in which we really try to do things that the Policy Cloud project is also doing very well. So to have co-creation workshop, to really have a multi-stakeholder approach. And that is really in the experiment and the co-design phase. So first you want to have some idea of where you want to go, what you can predict, what kind of data is there. Then you want to really experiment and show and demonstrate that it actually works. And then there's the implementation phase. And often, as we know from other ICT design projects, this is a 1/10,100 or 1/10,000 scale. So in terms of effort and time to really make it work. So in the long term, in that sense, it's also very important to see how these tools morph and change when they're actually put into use, and how they on the long term are used sustainably. So how does it become a part of a daily ritual of a policymaker? I think that's very important to think about. And connected to that, there's also what kind of impact indicators are you then looking at? So is it the amount of uptake, or is it the amount of use, or is it the amount of policies that have changed due to your tool? These are interesting questions, and especially for the Policy Cloud case that we're discussing now. It's been told it's it's a cross-border issue that you also have to pick up cross-border if you really want to trace these heat maps, which are really interesting in themselves already, and that there's often lines between those hotspots. How can you think about that also in a multilinguistic kind of way, and also in a post-demographic kind of way? And by that latter, I mean that there's of course natural language that people use, but there's also an online language that people use. And often hidden languages or code languages or signs, and there's particular cultures of that language to express certain things. And these kind of memes, even in these kind of groups, are very important to also understand. And how can you actually objectively and quantitatively look at that? That is, I think, a new challenge if you go beyond only language-based models that come from our natural language speak. I won't stay here too long because this has also been pointed out already by the former speaker, but of course it's important also to look at how regulation is shaping what you can and what you cannot do with these tools. And this always interacts with also the technological kind of boundaries. And so on the one hand, we have the tools to understand, for instance, radicalization far better via digital means and also on the digital world. That creates a kind of moral obligation to do so, to a certain extent, with the right safeguards in mind, but it also means that current legal frameworks are often not entirely up to par in understanding what are the impacts of these tools and what you then should and should not protect, or how far you can go. And of course, then the AI regulation, that's the proposal that has just been published, it will take a couple of years before it's finally into all member states' place. But it's very interesting to follow these discussions as well in connection with the Policy Cloud project to see how it interacts and interferes. And one very interesting point here is, of course, that the regulation demands an openness and transparency of models. So what kind of models are you using? Can you explain them? Can you explain how you come to a particular prediction, even if it's for particular forms of law enforcement? So it's very interesting to think about what is transparency for a policymaker? How does that work? And it also links to the next point, the last one, and that's of course the political accountability. And these discussions on radicalization have a political color. We look at them objectively, of course, as a policy cloud, but the ones we give the tools to, the policymakers, are often connected to particular departments who have a particular political color for 4 years or longer. And you need to think about that as well. So how does it actually interact with the directions that particular member states are taking? And can we step away from that and say, okay, we want to create an objective form of tools, but these tools are never completely objective, even if it's evidence-based. They change. At minimum, they change already the information position of a policymaker and also of a department, which also allows them to make different choices. And so you give them new insights, and these new insights will force them also to rethink current policies, to maybe, it can also be very painful because they might learn that the way they were doing things is completely not effective. And so it might also show particular weaknesses of current policies. And these are things to think about as well. And in that sense, I think it's very interesting to connect, to see also how the Policy Cloud project and the tools that it develops can also connect to actual not only prediction on the long term to instigate new policy changes, but also how it connects to particular real-time interventions and what that means. It can be very interesting, and I think it's the big potential of this tool that you can actually do that, to trace these networks closer and closer and to really understand what's going on, and then also set out to preventive action. But that's a very exciting and also challenging path to take, what you can do there, of course. And then, of course, there is a question of success of these tools and the longevity. So if you say we do evidence-based policymaking, will that become the new standard for the way we do policy in the next 5, 10, 50 years? And if so, how is it, when do we see the success rate of this? When do we put our own KPIs with this Policy Cloud project? And that also means that if due to these policies, radicalization is diminishing, or maybe it contributed to certain policies that diminish, can you then also scale down the tools that you use? So is there a kind of gradation in the type of, I don't know, in a dashboard I can envision that you can click on or click off or subscribe to different levels of intelligence or different types of tools. And that could be very interesting to think about also. How can you make the system interactive, connected to how interactive the policies are and change? And that for me is an interesting landscape to think about as a meta question to these kind of tools of digital analysis and prediction of phenomena like here radicalization and how that connects to the policy life cycle. So these are some pointers that I think can be interesting for a discussion and for some long-term questions on how this project is developing and what it can deliver. I'll keep it to that for the moment. Thank you.
Thanks, Tjerk, for these very interesting considerations and also questions to us in terms of the pilot. I think Armend and Daniele, I think there are some topics that I would like you to react on that you've seen that Tjerk has proposed. But before we do that, I would like to ask Zach to ask some questions to the audience as well, so that we can start this interaction all together.
And Marieke, there is also one question in the chat that was done during the presentation.
Exactly, and I would like to address that also during the panel discussion. I think it would be interesting to learn from you what your answer is on this one. Yeah. So first, I would like to invite the audience to go and meet us at slido.com, where you then enter, or you can take the QR code immediately, or you can go through slido.com and then you add hashtag 891-287. And that's where we would like to ask a few questions from you to understand a little bit where you're at in terms of policy cloud or data-driven policy making. Okay, here's the first question. Are you dealing with any challenges to be addressed with evidence-based policy making? So this is an open question where you can add a simple yes or no, or you could put like the topic that you're dealing with. So the challenge that you're facing. So if you join us at slido.com with the number 891-287 to join the specific questions, you can then join us with your answers there. So are you dealing with any challenges to be addressed with evidence-based policy making? Yes, health and social care integration specifically, but public health more broadly. Okay. This is another sector, but very interesting for our pilots as well, for a solution. So supporting researchers involved in Horizon Europe with policy-making objectives, okay. Okay, thanks. So let's move to the next questions. So how are you currently addressing these challenges? So related to the two previous topics, so the researchers that are dealing with policymaking and the health policymaking issue, how are you dealing with those at the moment? It's an open question. It's a complicated one. Probably need a little bit more time for this. Technology limitations in local government settings are challenging. Okay. Is this something you deal with as well, so that you see as well, Armend and Daniele, that is limiting the local government settings? Okay, co-creation workshops, lots of DPIAs. The challenge is often connecting data. Do you relate to this, Daniele? And I saw you nodding.
Co-creation workshop are something that we are doing also our use case.
Exactly. So something that Tjerk mentioned in terms of engaging with the to have a solid policy-making process. So for researcher, mostly depending on previous policy experience of researchers, difficult if researchers don't have previous experience themselves already. Okay. Thanks. Let's move to the next question. So would you be interested in implementing a cloud-based solution for data-driven policymaking like Policy Cloud? So is that a yes, a maybe, or a no? Okay, so it's very positive. Good. Okay, let's go to the last question because we then have some time to address our questions as well. Do you have the necessary skills in your organization to operate solutions like Policy Cloud? So yes, no, I would prefer to contract Policy Cloud as a service, or a simple no. Okay, so there's still work to do here. Okay, and then would like to, so we have the last question. What is your burning questions to the panel? But I think it would be easier if we add this question in the chat so that we can move on quickly to the discussion. So Zach, thanks for that. So the first question that is already in the chat, so is from Tala, and where he says, when you talk about radicalization, are you also addressing white supremacy, racism, and xenophobia and nativism throughout Europe? So Daniele, I think that's an interesting question to you, or Armend.
Yeah, maybe I can start, and Daniele probably can complement. I just wanted to clarify that, as I mentioned also at the beginning of the presentation, so for this specific use case, we are collaborating with Lombardy region. And let's say for their, based also on their experience with radicalization and what is also happening around the region. There are two main phenomena of radicalization that they are interested in starting, and there are also there is a dedicated unit within the DG security of the Lombardy region, which is dealing with this effect. So they are also have some kind of solution that are supporting their activities today. And as I mentioned, so they are interested in two types of radicalization, political and religious. But this does not preclude any other public administration that would like to use Policy Cloud to support any other domain or any other, let's say, aspect, for example, for this, in this specific case of radicalization. So if there is one, I can say a region or a public body in UK or in the US or in any other countries has this particular, let's say, case of racism, of white supremacy or xenophobia. So they have already policies that have been implemented in this aspect, or they want to implement such policies because there have been a lot of incidents or problems during the last years. So of course, Policy Cloud is a tool that allows the policymakers to implement or to support them in implementing such policies. But currently, let's say the Lombardy region is not interested in this topic. So, but as I mentioned, so if there are any other public bodies that are interested in these topics because they have already implemented policies or they want to implement new policies in order to address these topics, Policy Cloud can very good customize in order to support policymakers in their operations. So there can be also the scenarios that was illustrated before during my presentation can also be customized and oriented towards addressing these specific needs.
Thanks, Armend. Daniele, do you want to add anything here?
Okay, Armend clarified clearly that from technological point of view, there's no limitation about the specific domain you want to tackle. And containing in the question specific, can I say, matter about the focus is on the fact that on a specific matter, someone want to put in place or supposed to put in place violent behavior. So that's the reason why you have to, in some way, to try to intercept this kind of behavior before there's something wrong happen.
Thanks, Daniele. So now going back to what Tjerk has made us think about. So you have had some minutes to think about what he presented. So he talked specifically about elements of influence. So the understanding of data mining in the data life cycle, the interaction with the policy life cycle, the role of regulation, and the political implications and as resources. So how would you reflect on that when looking at first of all, at the pilot, and second of all, at the Policy Cloud solution? Daniele or Armend, how do you want to react to the food for thought that Tjerk has posed to us?
From a technical perspective, I think there are very good suggestions and indication that probably we have already thought about them, and that some of them are already being, let's say, implemented or designed. And some others can also be taken into consideration and also probably be enhanced after the project end. For example, what I took some note about the multilinguality, the code language, the hidden language used in the social media, or also about the how to keep track of the people moving away from the mainstream. And so, for example, that they are not using anymore let's say worldwide social media platforms like Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, or other tools, but they are probably moving to a privately owned or some more restrictive social media that also access to this might be difficult. For the multilinguality, I just wanted to mention that for now we are for sure adopting, let's say, supporting English version, and this is by default. But there is also the possibility that by embedding translation of the tweets, we can also support other languages, like, for example, in our case, Italian or Spanish or other languages. But the problem with the translation sometimes is that probably there are some, let's say, some elements that are lost in the translation and probably are not the best way. So we are also working on adapting, let's say, solutions that are supporting also other languages by default in order to have more insights from the opinions of the social media.
Thanks, Armend. Daniele, what was your reaction to the food for thought?
Some of these questions are also in our mind, and we have to improve. I mean, the ability to talk with the different stakeholders, because as much as we can gather suggestion or from different people, we can have a more clear idea about all the different aspects we have to consider in the project. So I thank Tjerk about this consideration, and I think that we have to, and also we are doing to improve our ability to consider different point of view.
Thanks. So maybe linked to that is a question that we also looked at earlier. So how do we decide what is radical behavior and what is not? So at what point do you say this is what we need to address?
So for this, Marieke, of course, so the tool itself is not, let's say, it's not the tool who make the decision for the policymaker. So the tool proposes some insights, some results to the policymaker based also on the keywords, or based also on the way, let's say, the policymaker itself interrogates the system. So because there are probably different needs or potential risks that want to be analyzed. But in any case, the tool does does not substitute the policymaker itself. So the policymaker, the person who stands behind, let's say, the office and who is the responsible for the decision making, because probably he has a long experience in the domain, and he knows also better than the tool for example, also when we define the initial set of keywords that are to be implemented in the tool, it is not the tool itself that decide what are the keywords. First of all, it is the policymaker who inputs the keywords in the tool. The tools analyzes, processes the data from, let's say, based on different machine learning technologies and deep learning, and the results are then showed to the policymaker, and then the policymaker can also define, for example, the priority or some of the results that are very interesting for him, and others that probably are, let's say, false positives or not interested from, let's say, from his perspective. So that's why I wanted to emphasize that this is a decision support tool, and it is not the tool itself that that define the policies for the policymaker or for the public body.
Thanks, Armend. I think that's very, very clear. So, Zach, are there any questions from the audience? Because I still have a few more things that I would like to ask our panel, but I mean, if there are questions from the audience, obviously they go first.
No other questions from the audience.
No? Then linking to that comment, Armend, I think that's a very interesting comment that you're making. So the European strategy for data is meant to put people first in developing technology, as well as on the need to defend and promote European values and rights in how we design, make and deploy technology in the economy. So how is Policy Cloud putting people first? Linking very much to the comment that you make, that it's the policymaker really that is taking the decisions here.
Yeah, so as also already mentioned, also during the to the presentations, we have followed a co-design process. So from the beginning, from the requirements collection, during all the development process, we have been in contact with the end user organizations, so public entities from around Europe that are supporting us in developing and validating the tool itself. Another thing that also I mentioned during my presentation was the co-creation workshops with external stakeholders, so people not directly, let's say, employed by the public bodies that are part of the end user organizations part of the project, but probably other policymakers in different levels, from the central to governmental level, but also other European organizations like the Radicalization, like the RAN, or other institutions that also can support the validation and adaptation of these policies, and also in the development of the Policy Cloud system itself.
Thanks. Tjerk, do you want to add anything here? Because you mentioned this quite extensively as well during your presentation.
Yeah, well, yeah. It's always the point is that I think co-creation is very important also to understand, especially those questions that I pose. So how is it going to be used? Who's going to use it? I think already how Armend is explaining how it's going to be used. It's very interesting, because it will contribute to also an understanding of how policymakers interpret those tools, if it's presented in the dashboard, or how they will connect to that. And they themselves, through a democratic process, have, of course, some political oversight and accountability. So indirect, of course, these tools contribute to somehow citizen participation, but direct citizen participation is always very difficult. I mean, look at us, we're now online in Zoom and we're all on a distance, so that on the one hand, that creates opportunities. So you can also try to use online tools to help shape ideas about such tools, and how people think about that, and how they feel about data sharing, or about the openness of models, etc., etc. But also there you always have a self-selection bias, and so it's just in general it's a very difficult process. So co-creation is people always underestimate how timely and costly it is to really do it well in these kind of projects. So I really like the fact that the Policy Cloud is doing this, because it's not an easy thing, and often it's a very qualitative and insightful thing, but not everything that you find in such a workshop can easily be translated into a digital tool. But it's I think what's important is to do that ongoingly. So not to do it once, but to also have multiple points in your project where you go back to particular stakeholders or focus groups, even on or offline, and just test and explain particular things that you've been developing. And I think that's an important effort that in Europe in general we need to do a lot more when it comes to AI and data-driven tools, because you can also learn a lot as a developer from those insights that you might not have thought about at all. So in that sense, I think it's very good that Policy Cloud is doing it, and I hope that they will do it in some further down the project as well.
Thanks, Tjerk. Zach, are there any additional questions in the chat or in the Q&A that we have to address in our last minute?
Nope.
No? Okay, so then while closing off, I want to thank everyone that has been joining us. And I want to thank our speakers as well for all their energy while discussing this topic. And I want to ask you for one last question. So we've looked at policies against radicalization. So if we look at this particular challenge, we've seen that people on the call are also dealing with different challenges. But if you look at this challenge in particular, how could you give if you have one recommendation to give to policymakers dealing at the exact same situation? So what would you recommend them? Just one, because we have 1 minute. So Daniele, do you want to start?
It's not an easy question. I mean,
no, it's not.
I think that our approach is to collect and analyze data and to try to make decision data-driven. This is something that is being developed more and more by public administration. It's not, and I think that is something that could be a good approach, and also obviously to have a broad reach about many stakeholders that can help you to better understand the phenomenon.
Thanks. So have a good look at who are your stakeholders. Thanks. Armend, very briefly, one recommendation.
No, since Daniele mentioned the stakeholders, I would say the data. So data is the key for this type of evidence-based policy making. So if you don't have the experience with the data, so with data analytics, probably you should start investing and also having, let's say, a dedicated person who is following these activities, or try to, let's say, to create to build new skills for the people that are already involved in the policymaker, because data is becoming more and more useful in our daily life, and so this can support also the policymakers in implementing new policies and validating existing policies.
Thanks, Armend. So you're looking at using the data available and upscaling the skills in your organization.
Yes.
Thanks. Tjerk, you're the last. One recommendation.
Very briefly, I think that there to experiment and experiment wisely, but also in the long run, when you start using these tools and try to understand that, there to accept that as a policymaker, your job will change and that it might change for the better. So also try to envision how you can reinvent your position and your work with these kind of tools. And I think that is very important.
Thanks, Tjerk. So revisiting your strategy, having a look at planning ahead. Thank you.
But also allowing that it might change your work and that you have to rely on these type of tools more and more.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks everyone for joining the webinar, and thank you to all our speakers for your wonderful insights and your great discussion. Thank you very much. Make sure you join tomorrow as well. Tomorrow we have the urban policymaking through analyzed crowdsourced data at 2. Thanks.
Thanks everybody. Have a nice day.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.